Hi there, Agile friends. Get ready for the World Tour of Agile at the Agile Online Summit 2023. You can join us from October 24th to 26th for a global showcase of cutting-edge Agile practices and insights. Join us at agileonlinesummit.com. This year, we will be featuring some of the best work done around the world and world-class keynotes. You can check all of that at agileonlinesummit.com. But the best part is that your ticket is on us. That's right, it's free to attend and immerse yourself in the world of Agile excellence. Don't miss out on this opportunity to level up your skills and network with peers and industry experts. Mark your calendars and secure your spot at AOS 23 today by visiting agileonlinesummit.com. So get your free ticket or opt for the full digital pass that lets you keep all the conference videos forever and organize, why not, Agile learning sessions at work. You can get the full digital access at agileonlinesummit.com. I'll see you in the conference floor. Hello everybody, welcome to this very special bonus episode. We'll be talking prioritization and other aspects that affect estimation. We'll definitely talk a little bit about no estimates as well. And we have with us Troy Lightfoot. Hey Troy, welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So I heard Troy in the Agile Uprising podcast talking about prioritization. We'll dive into that in a minute. He's a lean product development coach and trainer for prokanban.org. He also coaches and trains Scrum, Kanban, Safe, and other Agile scaling approaches. He transitioned from computer science to full-time Agile coaching, specializing in lean portfolio and program management. He's also the co-founder of the Agile Uprising podcast. Be sure to give it a listen and go through the back catalog. There's plenty of great episodes there. And he's also an active blogger. So Troy, that was a short intro. Tell us a bit more about yourself and how did you end up becoming interested in forecasting and estimation for software development? What's your origin story?
Oh, well, thank you so much for setting that up. I appreciate it. So like many people, I went to school for computer science, got out of school and quickly wanted to do something, right, in the industry. In fact, one of the reasons I even went to school for computer science was because of a presentation I saw back in the early 2000s, like around 2001, maybe, by Steve Jobs, where he was talking about the original iPod. I saw that presentation and I got like, wow, that's really cool. And back then I was doing a lot of music production, and I was consulting actually when I was like 18, 19, basically. I was literally driving my car around, teaching people how to use a software program called Logic. Now it's called Logic Studio, I think. Anyway, so we were all using Apple computers in the music studios. And so I would watch these kind of Apple keynotes and got really inspired to do product development. And I said, how am I going to do that? Well, maybe I should go to school for computer science, learn how to code and things like that, right? But that's kind of how it started. So when I got out, I quickly wanted to transition to the product space as fast as I could. And that's been my passion ever since. And so how do I get involved in things like metrics and forecasting and all that? To be honest with you, I just was self-taught about a lot of stuff. When it comes to the Agile world. And so I would read books on my own. And there was a few fundamental books I read, back in the mid and late 2000s around Scrum, in particular, Mike Cohn's work. And so I, obviously learned about story point estimation and all the traditional kind of ways of thinking about estimation in Scrum, for example. But then I can't remember the exact book it was, but there was a book I read about lean in software development. Oh, it was Lean Software Development, I think, by Mary and Tom Poppendieck.
Mary Poppendieck, indeed.
Yes.
A classic.
And so that got me really interested. And from there, it was just like everything I could learn about that topic. Because what happened was I was doing things like WIP limits and focusing on cycle time early on with teams, and we would just make it fun. And we did one of the first things I learned about was XP. So basically we did a lot of pair programming, continuous integration, things like that. And I was having so much fun doing the pair work and coaching people how to do it and seeing people collaborate. And then that just kind of lended itself to limiting your whip, right? So we kind of started introducing all these things. And it was so effective actually at kind of being able to do things much faster and with better quality and kind of the growing the skill sets on the team that I said, this sounds like something I could help other people with. So that's kind of.
So you did the same with the XP that you had done with the music software, right? You went on and started coaching others.
Yeah, I guess it's just I like doing it. Maybe I just like helping people and sharing things that people are interested in and things like that. So that's how it all started. And today, you know, the last 7 years, I've been working for a large consulting company, one of the bigger ones out there. And I've been doing, you know, everything we've been talking about just at scale mainly. And doing it at many different types of industries, which are much more challenging to do than in startups where I first came up. So, which has presented a whole list of challenges. And so one of my passions now is thinking about product management and portfolio management, but all these same topics, right? Like how to apply the lean software development way of working and thinking at scale, right? And so that's something I've been doing recently.
Absolutely. And we're going to talk also about that a lot during today's episode. But I want to come back to the origin story of this episode, which is a podcast episode I heard between you and Jay, whose last name I can't pronounce, so I won't even try. So Jay and you were in the Agile Uprising podcast talking about prioritization, and you talked about a specific mental model that I really appreciate. And I think after listening to you and Jay, I think it can help us understand how small things can have a big impact in software business. So let's introduce that idea. You were talking about at the time the gambler's ruin idea concept. Can you walk us through what that is, and then we'll dive into what that means for us when it comes to prioritization and also estimation?
I see. So Gambler's Ruin is a game. It's really like just a way to kind of prove a point, to be honest with you. But it is a type of a game, and it's kind of a math problem, actually, really is what it is, but turned into a game. So I first learned about Gambler's Ruin from a guy named Prateek Singh, who's one of the, I don't think he's a co-founder, but he's a co-owner, or I don't know exactly what the word is, but basically a co-founder of procommon.org. And in procommon.org, we have a few classes, and one of them is about applying flow metrics for Scrum. And that Gambler's Ruin is what we actually use in that class to like tell a story, pretty much. And we think about Scrum in the context of flow, and Gambler's Ruin is just one technique that we use for that. Yeah. That's how I learned about it. So,
yeah. And walk us through what that is, because I think it's really important to base like the conversation we're going to have to talk about what that is and the impact it can have on how we look at prioritization. So in practice,
I see.
What does it look like?
Gambler's Ruin is basically, imagine two people are sitting down to gamble, right? Whether they're playing poker or some gambling game. And it presents different scenarios. You know, scenario one is when they have the exact same amount of money and they had the exact same amount of skill. What are the odds of who's going to win over the long run, right? And then you kind of calculate those odds, and then you show that in the Gambler's Ruin example. And then there's another one which is where, okay, they have the same amount of skill, but one person has 10 times more money, right? Who's going to win, right? And then they have this, then one person who has a little bit of money has more skill compared to the person who has more money but less skill. How do the odds turn out, right? And so Gambler's Ruin is basically a simulation where you walk through using probabilities and tell the story. And really the point of Gambler's Ruin is to make the case mathematically using probabilities that if you have a slight skill advantage but far less money, the way that you can win most of the time is by placing small bets. So essentially, if you can place small bets with a small amount of money, you can actually win in the long run versus someone who has a lot more money. As long as, even if you don't have a significant skill advantage, but if you do have any skill advantage, then your odds go way up, basically. And if you can think about things like agile coaching and process improvement and all that, essentially that's what we're trying to do, right? We're trying to give ourselves and the companies we work at some type of process and skill advantage, right? So it's almost like trying to quantify the value of doing what we do, right? And when it comes to process improvement.
And when you were discussing that with Jane, the podcast, and the link for that episode will be in the show notes so that people can go and listen to the much more detailed explanation. And also there's some graphics and pictures that they've put together to help you follow that. One of the things that really, it's not that I didn't know it, but the way you guys talked about it and how you explained it, it became so much more clear to me, was this idea that if you think about, out there in the random world of product development, everybody's more or less the same skill.
Right.
But it could be some small differences. Some might say Apple and Tesla are better than others. Some might disagree. That's okay. But one of the things that you guys started talking about, but what happens when we reduce the bet size and have just a slight skill advantage? And as you were going through that, and you did a simulation, I believe, or at least you had the pictures of the outcome of the simulation on the podcast page, it became clear that small bets always lead to winning if you have even a slight skill advantage. And that was the thing that really shocked me, because if you start thinking about it, then what does that mean for us in prioritization? And as I was reflecting on it, and that was the insight for me, is that, okay, so that means that if we're unsure, we're much better than the competition, because we're always unsure, right? Because the market is also making decisions. It's not just our skill at product development, it's also the market making decisions. If we're totally unsure, if we're much better than the competition, then just by using small bets, and here the key is smaller than our competitors, we are going to always have a long-term advantage, right? And that was the insight that kind of, when I thought about it, as you guys were explaining, it kind of shocked me that I've always believed small bets was the right way to go. But as you started explaining that, it really hit me that actually, as a product developer myself, then I shouldn't worry too much about prioritization. Of course, I believe in the stuff I'm prioritizing, but I should worry about making small bets, right? Like small increments of value that are tested out in the market, right?
Right. So thank you for kind of teeing that up for me explaining more in depth what I was explaining on that podcast. So the idea of placing small bets, I guess let me back up what that even really means, right? And in terms of Gamblers for One. So you can think about every time you spend money on a product idea, right? Whether it's a new feature, a new product itself, a new user story, whatever, right? And it's totally independent of frameworks, et cetera, right? It really just says we're going to spend a certain amount of money on something, right? What is the ROI of that amount of money we're spending? Now, whether that's monetary, like straight ROI, or whether that's potentially increasing customer satisfaction, which we're not sure what that's going to equal to, or whether it's like opening up a new business opportunity, right? Things like that. We're all investing, and companies are investing the money to get some type of value, right? So the question is, how do we place bets, right? So if you were to take all of your money, right? If you had $10,000 and you were to place $10,000 on a roulette wheel one time, that would be a large bet, right? And if you were to place small $100 bets strategically over time, right? Those would be an example of small bets. And unlike gambling with roulette wheel, we actually have an advantage, because when we do this in product development, we can learn from the bets. That's really the key. So there's even mathematically, it makes sense gambling, but it's even better in product development, because the idea that we can know everything ahead of time about value is really just a fallacy, right? Because it's impossible. When there's more than one possible future outcome, the answer is not deterministic, meaning we can't actually know what's going to happen when we deliver something in product development.
Well, and so you were talking about roulette, and I think it's important for us to take that example and explain the key difference to product development is that in roulette, there's a limited number of outcomes. There's a physically limited number of outcomes. In product development, the outcomes are infinite, and they are not just unpredictable, but they are infinitely unpredictable, because you never know what's going to happen, right? So that even raises the importance of that aspect you mentioned a second ago, which is that bets in product development they are also feedback cycles, right? You learn, and that fits into the next bit.
Right. So there's a term that actually Prateek, who helped create that class I was talking about, he has this term that I really like called anti-fragile. And really what he means is fragility is like, if you're wrong, the system breaks, right? If you're wrong about your idea, we've wasted a lot of money and the company's going to fold. Or if it's a big company, then we just lost a lot of money, right? Maybe people lose their jobs or something like that. There's a big problem there. But that is the approach when you take very large bets. So what does a bet size mean? Let's talk about that. The bet size is really the amount of money you spend. And the way we think about that is in the form of cycle time, because yes, if you think about cycle time, it's how much time it takes to actually do something. That's the simplest way to explain it, right? And so the amount of time it takes is the amount of money spent, right? So if you have a run rate of how much something takes to deliver, right? And then you calculate the length of time, that cycle time is basically the amount of money you spent on that item, for example. And so that you can think about a cycle time of an item, whether it's a feature, a project, an initiative, a story, whatever, that is your bet size, right? So a lot of times people will say, hey, we're going to size something to be done within a sprint or in Scrum or something like that. But yeah, when you look at the cycle time of their items, it takes like 45 days or something like that, right? And so, you might size it a certain way, but how long it actually took is your actual bet size, is what we're trying to say. So that's one thing. So the bet size, we're thinking in terms of money and time, and a kind of combination of those two things. What was your question again, Vasco? Actually, I think I lost track.
So that's an important point. So in product development, most of the contributing factor to cost is time. And if we look at bet size as the cost, right. Then of course that's time. And if we put that together with what you were talking about, the anti-fragile idea, right? And one of the concepts in anti-fragile is that if you jump 1,000 times 1 meter, you're going to survive. But if you jump one time 1,000 meters, you're going to die. Right.
Yes.
And so the size of the risk, and that's what I was getting at. So the bet size is the cost, which you just said, but it's also the risk. Right. So we need to look at the consequence of a bet, right? If let's say if all hell breaks loose and you lose just the time and money you spent on it, that's fine. And then the other aspect is, what if we do something that maybe it's short in time but could kill the company? That you don't want to do too. So we're talking about bet size in 2 dimensions here, right?
Yes. Yeah, so that's a great point, Vasco. Thank you for bringing me back. So one of the cool things about this, if you want to learn more about this topic, actually, there's a book called Thinking in Bets by Andy Duke, which is kind of the philosophy for a lot of this stuff we're talking about. But if you make a very large bet and you're wrong, right? Like I was saying, the system breaks. The thing about making small bets, though, is small bets when you're wrong make you stronger instead of break you. That's the whole concept of being anti-fragile. And so if you place a very small bet and you go test an idea out in the market and you're wrong about it, you will learn from that. And then you can learn from that information and don't assume that you know everything, like as if you're going to place a large bet, and then go place another small bet and see what happens and learn from that. And as you're learning, that improves your, how should I put this? Possible outcomes, right? That improves better possible outcomes. You're basically enhancing your probability.
And because the outcomes exist in an infinite space, in product development, there's no limit to the possible outcomes. What we are doing is just literally with small bets, we are navigating towards a better outcome.
Yes.
And which is, what we're saying is just the same Agile has said for a long time. But I think this is a very good way to think about it from in a very, how do you say, concrete perspective. Small bets helps us navigate to a better destination than large bets, except by accident.
Right. And I want to add to that, because everything you said is dead on. When it comes to the Agile space, you're right. It's funny that nowhere in the Agile Manifesto does it say that we have to use averages and story points to do forecasting and estimation, right? And by the way, nowhere in the Scrum Guide does it say that either. So somehow we've conflated things in the Agile space with things that just aren't really true, right? And that has become just the law of the land for some reason.
And now you're talking about using story point estimates and forecasting based on story point velocity, right?
Right. And any type of relative estimation, whether it's story points or not, and also using averages for forecasting. And it just so happens to be story points and velocity are the most common right way of doing it. I'm not even trying to pick on story points.
And this aspect of forecasting now becomes important. So we were just talking about how small bets actually help you win in Gambler's Ruin as the concrete example, but also in product development. And one of the things you guys talked about in that podcast with Jay was that once you understand that small bets are actually the winning strategy, then it doesn't really matter what you work on first, as long as it's something small. In fact, I think you went further than that in the podcast, and you said that as long as you are delivering quickly and you're learning, that is much more important than trying to start many different things at the same time and hoping that it will work. You were using, I think, a 3-month example of planning or something like that. And that kind of brings in one of our close friends here. His name is Whip, work in process.
Sure.
Because actually, when we talk about bet size, let's not forget that actually the higher the whip, the higher the bet size.
Yeah, could be. Yeah, it could be. And the reason for that is because of the relationship between whip and cycle time. And so if we're thinking about bet size in terms of cycle time, then we're saying, okay, most people know about the Little's Law formula, right? Although a lot of people don't think about the underlying assumptions about the formula, which is another podcast we recorded actually. But anyway, one of the kind of the premise of Little's Law, right, is that there is a mathematical relationship between the amount of work in progress and the wait time. And Dr. Little coined that. He referred to wait time in his original paper as cycle time. So that's what we're using essentially. We're using the original terms, and we're trying to think about bets in that. So how does WIP relate to priority and small bets, right? So actually, one of the Little's Law assumptions actually is that the average age of the work items remains stable. And so one way to explain that is you would focus on work item age as a metric every day, or at whatever frequency you look at the metrics, but hopefully daily, right? And it depends on the scale, right? If you're doing a very large initiative, maybe you look at it once a week or something like that, right? But let's just say for a team, for example, you would look at it every day because the work item age represents your current investment. So if you think about this, if cycle time represents your actual bet size and your investment that actually happened in the past, right? Then work item age is just a leading indicator to what your cycle time will be, right? Is the precursor to that. So if you don't allow things to age, if you can control the age of the items, you control your investments. And so that's why work item age. Now, I know you mentioned WIP, but I will say if you can control your work item age, you will control your WIP. And so instead of purely focusing on WIP, which is a good thing to focus on, I'm not saying it's not. If you use work item age as an actionable metric, you will control your WIP. And then you could do things like set WIP limits. And one more thing, Vasco, and then I'll turn it over to you. The reason why we don't purely focus on WIP is because you could have a WIP of 2, right? And then the cycle times for that could be very long. And there could be many reasons for that, right? But let's just say you had a WIP of 2, but those 2 things could be broken into 5 smaller pieces of value, 5 smaller bets. But you didn't do it because for whatever reason, right? Maybe you just didn't think about it, or you said, hey, we're limiting our WIP, and we have a really low WIP. It's only 2. Meanwhile, your WIP is actually 10 if it could be broken into 5 smaller bets apiece, right? And so we use work item age as a way of thinking about our current investments and controlling WIP, and then pairing that with things like WIP limits. Yeah.
Yeah, and I really like that aspect of looking at work item age. I had not thought about it before, but once you and Jay explained it on the podcast, it helped me realize that actually work item age becomes a leading indicator for both bet size, cycle time, and WIP
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So if you're
Right.
looking at that metric, you're once you know how it is, you're intuitively also thinking about cycle time and WIP, so the size of the bets, which is what we really care about if we want to succeed at product development, right? And I think that it's good to go back to that idea that the discussion we're having is around how can we make sure we succeed at what we're doing, right? Delivering value to our customers. And bet size is a key aspect of that. And when you start thinking about smaller bets, and that's why I like that episode so much, when you start thinking about smaller bets and you realize that actually bet size is more important than the actual specific priority, because every bet gives you some more information that feeds into prioritization as well. Once you start thinking about that, you start to understand that actually we don't really need estimates of anything if we're already looking at cycle time and at work item age and WIP. If we're looking at those flow metrics already, then what matters is what's the next most important thing to learn, and how can we make a small bet around that, right? And when I was thinking about this, I was starting to, and you guys mentioned it in the podcast, and it totally shifts the role of prioritization in our work in product development, right? And you guys were talking about like what needs to change in prioritization, and I really wanted you to bring that as well here. Like, how do we then need to think about prioritization once we recognize that bet size and work item age are much more important questions?
Interesting. Thank you. One way to think about this is the more time you spend prioritizing work, the more you're increasing your bet size. And here's what I mean. So actually, Reinerson talked about the amount of, if you start spending time working on something, even if it's analysis and prioritization, right? There's a cost to that. And that actually increases the cost of delay. Okay. That's some from his Principles of Product Development Flow book. So he talks about actually starting the clock from the time people start working on it in that sense. Now, we typically will think about, hey, we can do 6 months of analysis on an idea, and if we don't start the development of it, then we don't kind of count it, right? But all of that money is an investment to go spend time doing analysis and prioritization into all these ideas, right? And I'm not saying don't do any analysis, and I'm not even saying don't prioritize work, but I'm saying you have to think about that in terms of there is a cost, an investment to doing that work, right, from a business perspective. And so we want to minimize that cost as much as possible to do enough to be able to get something started, to go place a small bet, in theory, right? That's what we're talking about. So the question is about prioritization, right? Well, the truth is, if you spend 3 months prioritizing, let's use an extreme example, right? If you had 2 different features, and let's say each feature was potentially going to take 3 months to build, for example, right? And you spent 3 months to do analysis and prioritize each feature, okay? Now you're talking about, instead of taking 3 months, now you have doubled the time and essentially potentially double the investment. Maybe not totally financially, because maybe it doesn't cost as much money to do analysis, but maybe it does, who knows, right? Versus if you said, hey, we think this is a good idea, let's spend 2 weeks on it, right? A week or two. And essentially what you're doing is you're just putting that thing that still might take 3 months out there, right? But you're getting it out faster and you're seeing if the idea works or not. That's the small bet concept. And then you're going to learn from that, versus assuming that all your upfront analysis and prioritization is going to be correct, right? That's just the mindset.
And when you said that, immediately came to mind that when we think about bet size, we really, following what Don Reinert said when we should start the clock, we really should be making small bets everywhere. Right? We should be making small bets in initial filtering. We should be making small bets in initial analysis. We should be making small bets in initial prioritization, and then, of course, in execution itself. And this really helps us to think about, okay, so prioritization isn't something we do. And this happens in a lot of companies, right? Come October, we're recording this in August. 2 months from now, a lot of people will spend many hours in meeting rooms trying to decide the priority for everything to be done in 2024. and they will come up with it, but they will
Right.
spend 3 months doing that. And of course, most of that will never be touched. So even the planning becomes a big bet, right? Not the
Yes.
execution at all, just the planning becomes a big bet.
So my opinion is the act of prioritizing is valuable. I believe that. Meaning getting human beings aligned on why we should start something, there's value in there, because especially at large organizations, people disagree, right? People will argue about why one thing should be more than another, blah, blah, blah. And so, okay, getting alignment between people, say, you know what? Here's a sequence of items that if we start them, that's a good enough idea, right? But the actual priority itself for product development is, this might sound controversial, but it's almost meaningless because you don't know what's going to happen until you've delivered it, right? And so if you go with that mindset, no, let's just do enough to have a conversation so we can align on what things to start. If you just think about prioritization that way, then it really simplifies the whole process, right? And then you can do it much faster.
And now we need to turn it into practice. So how do we do that? Because what you just said is very important. So the act of prioritization is important, but the prioritization you end up with, as long as brings alignment, is not that important. So how do we make it in practice?
Well, there's many ways to do it, right? I have a preferred way. I do think, you know how a lot of people, I don't mean to generalize, but I've heard a lot of people say this, that SAFE's kind of Wistriff method is not good because it's not what Don Reinerson, used and things like that, right? And fair enough. I mean, it is not what Don Reinerson said, to be fair. I mean, that is true. But what Don Reinerson said also isn't really that applicable for new product development, because his approach assumes that you can quantify the lifetime value of something, right? And when you don't know something like software product development in particular, it's too many unknowns to even suggest that you can do that, right? So what SAFE has done is they've said, okay, why don't we just do a kind of a relative estimate on these concepts, right? Okay. What I'm saying is people rely on those relative estimates as they're really meaningful. And the way I think about it is I'll use something like Wistriff because it's a nice way to think about things. It's like, hey, what's the business value of this? What's the value to the customer? What's the value to the company? Let's just have a conversation. What's the time and criticality of it? If we don't have it out by June, are we going to lose money, right? Those are nice things to talk about, right? Like it's part of a prioritization conversation. And so what I do is when I do that conversation, I don't use points or relative estimates at all. I just have I literally use a grid, 3x3 matrix grid, where on the y-axis I'll have the numerator of that cost of delay equation, business value, risk reduction, opportunity enablement that SAFE says, and untime or criticality. Well, I'm sorry, the y-axis is that, the x-axis is time and criticality, actually. And what I do is I will just take one thing or another and I'll facilitate a conversation with people, and they will just have to justify to each other why one thing is more or less or the same as the other, right? And then we use a visual representation of that justification, meaning it's higher on the y-axis or it's to the right on the x-axis, right? If where the things land, if people say that makes sense, then that's all you need. You can do 5 minutes a feature max to do that kind of conversation. And then we go and we do a job sizing, right? And we do try to break it as small as possible. That's the small bet piece, right? And then you can sequence it however you want. You can put numbers on that if you want, right? You can figure it out, like which one's the highest, which one's the smallest. And if you want to do like a Wistriff calculation, you can. It's not really required. You can simply just say, these ones should be prioritized because they're high, right? And these ones are the smallest bet. So let's just start there, right? And we can just go it that way. Or you can do a more...
And I think that's one of the I would say conclusions from this conversation is that whatever the value we think something has, whatever the time criticality or whatever we think something has, the key is start with the smallest bet of those that have high importance and value. Yeah. Right? Don't start with all of them at the same time. Don't start with the biggest one. Start with the smallest one.
Start with the smallest ones.
Yeah. And I think that is a great insight. That also, when you start thinking about estimation, totally destroys the value of planning out everything and estimating the duration of everything. Because in fact, the small bets are there to inform our future decisions, and we don't want to commit to a long-term backlog. We want to commit to learning and adapting as quickly as possible through this concept of small bets. And I really like the comment that, okay, have that discussion, have that alignment with the team, but then start with the smallest bet of those that are considered the most valuable.
Right. This works great when you don't have a ton of dependencies. As soon as you have a lot of dependencies, right, which is people are going to say, oh, we have a lot of dependencies, right? It doesn't mean you shouldn't break things down. It doesn't mean you shouldn't think things in small bets. You should, right? But ultimately, you're going to be a little bit limited, or a lot of it, right? Limited to the amount of dependencies. For example, if you have 5 small bets, right, and they're all dependent on one another, right, even to get out the door, then essentially you're making 5 small bets, 1 big bet in that scenario, right? So eliminating dependencies, not just managing them, is critical for product development. Now, you're never going to be able to totally eliminate them. So a lot of people hear conversations like this and they say, well, in theory, it sounds great, but it doesn't work in practice because there's always going to be dependencies. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't. The more you can reduce them, the better your bet sizes are going to be.
And if we use an approach like slicing, we can actually slice our features and stories in order to segregate dependencies and deliver the non-dependent parts first, because that gives us information both in execution as well as potentially in the market.
Right. And you nailed it. So there's a couple ways, right? Like you talked about slicing. There's team formation, right? How are the teams formed, where you're essentially, the way you form the teams, they are going to be dependent on one another intentionally, right? Because there's elements, there's skill set elements. There's a lot of ways to reduce dependencies, right? It's just the point of saying that is, the more dependencies you have, even if you spent a year prioritizing your work and you think you had the best priority in the world of this list of stuff, right? And let's pretend in a fake universe that your priority was going to work exactly as you planned it. Okay, let's go through all that. If you have dependencies, it totally trumps all the work you did, because the teams won't be able to deliver it in that order anyway. So essentially, like, really, the dependencies are critical to all of this, actually. Yeah.
Absolutely. If you have dependencies, you have bigger bets than you think you have.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. Yeah.
So, Troy, we're getting close to the end, but of course, people may want to find out more about you and the work that you're doing. Get in touch. Where can they do that?
So you can find me at a few places. One, you can find me at my website, which is prokanbantraining.com. I do run public classes a few times a year. And most of the time I teach, it's private at companies, but once in a while, especially on like a holiday break, I'll teach a class or something. So there's that. Also, you can find me on the Agile Uprising. So we have a free Discord, totally free. And you can come and talk to me. You can come and talk to Jay. Actually, Prateek from prokanban.org is on there. He recently joined. So you can come and yell at us and whatever you want. You could go in there and you can go nuts. Okay, it's all free, right? And last thing I'll plug is prokanban.org. If you're not a fan of Discord, has a free Slack community, and so we can link that too. Yeah,
absolutely. We'll put the link to all of that in the show notes, of course. And you heard it. Troy doesn't usually hang out on LinkedIn, so definitely join the Agile Uprising Discord or the prokanban.org Slack to get in touch. Troy, one last thing. If there's a resource that you think people who are interested in our conversation and want to go deeper, one resource for them, what could that be?
There's so many, but all right. The best resource to start with I've ever read, that I always find is the best summary, is a book by Dan Vicanti called Actionable Agile Metrics for Predictability. If you read that book, then when you listen to this conversation, a lot of his would hopefully start to make sense, right? Now, you can, of course, read the book Thinking in Bets by Andy Duke and things like that, but this particular book talks about the concept of flow metrics in software development and product development, right? And it teaches all of the basics around those things. And if you read that book, then you'll understand a lot of these things we've been talking about in the podcast, if it is confusing to you, I would say.
Yeah, maybe absolutely. Absolutely. And also the book, Actionable Agile Metrics for Predictability, helps you understand why there are much better options than sitting down and estimating everything up front and then trying to follow that plan. So definitely a great recommendation, Dan Vacante's book. So thank you very much, Troy. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for your generosity with your time and your knowledge.
Thank you. And I let me just say one last thing, if you don't mind. So I am on LinkedIn, but I don't know what happened over the last few years, but the whole social media thing, I've just been really turned off. So you can connect with me on LinkedIn. Maybe I'll update. I haven't updated my profile in years, so maybe I'll update it before this podcast comes out. But the reason, like, why is, I am on LinkedIn, it's just that I'm not really a user of it. So to be honest with you,
yeah, absolutely. We'll put the link to Troy's LinkedIn page just in case he decides to go back. Thank you, Troy.
All right, thank you.
We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.